pushing 17, 18, I don't know. Tuesday,
18, yeah.
Tuesday.
Okay, this is November 18th,
Yes, sir.
1986.
Yeah.
This is Joe Todd, an interview with Mr. Harold A. Slusser in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Mr. Slusser, where were you born?
Minden, Nebraska. Minden.
And when's your birthday?
25 June. 09.
1909. Who is your father?
Clarence A. Slusser.
And your mother?
Minnie J.
Was that her maiden name?
Oh, no, Maucher. M-A-U-C-H-E-R.
Okay. What kind of work did your father do?
Oh, I guess you call him a laborer. He was, he worked in sugar factories, a beltman and wheelwright up in Colorado for a number of years. But outside of that, he was a little bit of everything.
How long did you live in Nebraska?
About 3 years. I think I was 3 and a half when I left there and moved to Colorado.
What part of Colorado?
Loveland.
Loveland. Why did the family move to Colorado?
Well, Dad was working for, as I understand it, Dad was working for a railroad at the time, and he was a carpenter, and my mother's brother lived in Loveland, and Dad was working over in that area, and they decided to move the family over there. They could do better there than they could do in the middle of Nebraska. Nebraska was strictly from farming, and Dad had tried farming and didn't pan out because he was a town kid to start with. Maybe that was the reason.
And how long did you live in Colorado?
About a little over 9 years.
9 years. And then from Colorado, where did you move?
Went to Salem, Oregon.
Salem, Oregon. And why'd you move to Oregon?
Is this on the record? I mean, is it on the tape?
I can take it off if you want.
Well, if you will. It's a sad story.
Okay.
Mother's parents died in 1920, and in the spring of 1922, we got our first check from their estate. They were from it. They had quite a bit of property then, and of course it was a large family, but still, I think the first check was about $2,500. And the next day, my father went down to the sugar factory down there and quit. My God, he's tired of working all his, slaving all his damn life, and they started and just moving, and we wound up in Salem due to the fact that we had a soft tire, which is a kind of an odd thing. But Dad was like that. He absolutely, well, he and Mother, neither one could handle money, and he made what I would say comparative earnings, and when he was there in the factory in Loveland, other people was working, raising families, and getting the same kind of wages that he was, and doing well, but he wasn't. We were poor people. We were the poorest people. We were the poorest people in town. and we were left, and like I say, then his mother's, well, then he had to go look for another job up there in Oregon. It was a funny thing. I talk about the soft tire. We'd stayed in Salem in a little old campground. This is 1922, and they didn't have motels. They had campgrounds. We was there in the campground living in a tent, and an old T-model Ford. And my brother cranked up the Ford one day. We were gonna leave. Where the hell we was going, I don't know. I had no idea, and I don't think Dad did. But anyway, when he went around, decided to call in, get around, get the back end, he said, "Hey, Dad, you got a soft tire here." So Dad took it off of the, jacked it up, took the tire off, and patched the tire. And when we pumped it back up, so the guy named Whelan came by and wanted to know if we wanted to pick prunes. And all us kids could work picking prunes one day, like Harper's hands are, that kind of crop followers. And so Dad said, all right. So we went out and picked this guy's prunes for him for about 6 weeks. And that time Mother got sick. Had to go to the hospital one thing or another, so that kind of stopped us from moving. So we wound up staying there 5 years with this soft tire.
Where did you stay in Oregon? What,
Salem.
did you stay in the town itself?
Yeah. We lived on the outskirts of it, and then we moved out down. But all the time I went to school, I was in the Salem, Oregon.
Did they have those labor camps out there, you know, when all the Elkies went out west?
No, this is way before that.
Oh, this before that?
Oh, yeah, actually this is 1922.
Oh, 22?
22.
Okay.
And so we lived there, and then in 1927, I joined the Navy. And a year later, my folks moved to California. But I didn't necessarily want that on the record about my dad and his financial situation, because that's just the way he was. But
okay. Now you
so,
joined.
like I say, after 5 years in Salem, well, then I joined the Navy, and a year later, my folks moved down to Los Angeles area and settled in Glendale, and I made a career out of the Navy.
You joined the Navy what year?
August 1927.
Where did you take your boot camp?
San Diego.
San Diego. Tell me about boot camp.
Boot camp was a new way of life. I mean, I had been a boy up until then, you might say, and I was a kid, and I was small and light complected and fair haired. Didn't shave yet, and so I looked more like 13 or 14. And so I had more or less acted the same way up until the time. But then now here I'm with men. We're not boys anymore. We're not kids anymore. So it was a new way of life. And of course we learned to drill, and I got chewed out for stepping wrong, like everybody else did when we made a mistake, or we got really chewed out for it. Sometimes we put the arms and double time around the grinder, the drill field, and I slept in a hammock, and I immediately fell out of my hammock and banged my knee up and went to the hospital over that for a couple of weeks. missed my company and went back and finished training with another company. But I got a bit for mathematics, although I had no real education for higher mathematics. But the mathematics that I had studied, I knew well and did well at it. So when they give us examinations for schools, I made one of the top grades, due to the fact that a lot of it was mathematics. So and I had requested to go to electric school, so they sent me over to electric school I was there for 8 months, learning how to be an electrician. So I had better than 13 months in the Navy when I went aboard ship the first time. And then that was another different way of life.
Now, in boot camp at San Diego, did you live in, what type of barracks did you live in?
Well, the first 3 weeks when we was in detention camp, we had these square army tents that had a wooden floor, but there was this big square army tents. I guess they were maybe 12-foot square or something like that for the first 3 weeks while we was in quarantine, you might say. If anybody had any contagious disease, then it would show up during those 3 weeks. That was the idea. Then after that, well, they moved us over into the regular barracks building.
What were they like, the regular barracks buildings?
Oh, it was big long building. They're two-story buildings, and they had what we call a stanchion down the middle, so we could tie our hammocks to it and swing them. And of course, by that time, I'd got the middle of my hammock stretched out enough so I didn't slip out of it anymore. The new hammock is tight, and there's no belly in the middle of it, and it gradually does stretch to get, but first they made us tight, string right out tight, and it just flipped, and out I went, and hit right on the inside of my knee, and that's when I went to the hospital that time. But that was, there was one other fella fell out, but his mattress came out with him and he landed on it, so he didn't get hurt. But I was the only one that got hurt that I know of.
Did
at
you
that
spend
time.
the first 13 months in San Diego?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they shipped me up to the U.S.S. Tennessee, battleship 43.
And you went on board the Tennessee in
October
October 28th?
28, yeah.
What were your duties on board the Tennessee?
I went right aboard in the electrician's gang. And I went down to interior communications to start with, and they took care of the telephone and all of the signal systems that they had throughout the ship, and stuff like that. And both battle telephones and regular telephone communication that they had. Call bell circuits for the voice tubes and all that stuff. And then there was we had speed controls and smoke telegraph that indicated from the bridge whether if they wanted to maybe put up a smoke screen, or they just flip the lever and the people down the fire room on the boilers would get the indication, and they knew what to do. Of course, if they the idea of the economy with them was a light blue haze, and there was a point on this indicator for that, and if they got to making smoke and they did this and they wanted them to, well, they'd ring the bell and say, hey, and when it would, and they would indicate what kind of smoke they were getting, and the people would take it. I mean, that was one of the many things. There's all kinds of different communication systems on any ship, but I said that was just a one. For instance, the reason I brought that up was that was the first one that I worked on. The Tennessee was in the Navy Yard in Bremerton when I went aboard, and the fellow had overhauled this smoke telegraph system, and he got some of the wires crossed and he was having trouble with it. So they put me down there to help him. And I happened to be lucky enough to pinpoint the trouble. But that was just a lucky happenstance.
How old was the Tennessee? When was it built?
Tennessee was put in commission the 3rd day of May of 1920. So when I went aboard, she was 8 years old, comparatively new ship.
What kind of engines did she have? What kind of engines did the Tennessee have at that time?
Electric drive.
Electric drive.
Turbo electric.
Was it steam powered or coal?
Steam powered with oil.
Oil.
Yeah. They had a steam turbine to do the generators, and then the electric motors. They had 4 big electric motors, big enough you could take the rotor out of them and then you stand up inside them. But they was possibly the 4 of them together was 33,000 shaft horsepower. A little over 8,000 apiece.
I'd like to get just a description of life aboard the Tennessee. You know, where you slept, where you took your meals.
Well, we slept in hammocks back in those days, and we had a large room, and I had what they called billet hooks that were made secured to the overhead or ceiling, and we swung our hammocks on those. Of course, some of the older people that had been there for a while, they had camp cots, but when we got out to sea and got to rolling, the hammock was a better place, because the hammock, they always swing at fore and aft. So the ship roll around it, so you lay quiet. You know, you get a slight pitch. But these kids on these camp cots, sometimes they get shipped in a rough sea and they start sliding all over. But the older people, the senior people, got to use cots, and then we'd take the hammock down and fold them up, and we had what compartment, kind of a bin, you might say, down one side of our living compartment, and we'd put all our bedding in there, and we had our tables, our dining tables were secured to overhead, and we'd let them down and have our meals out in the same place, in the same compartment. But years later, well, they got bunks all over the ships and they cafeteria style and whatnot. But this is all family style, and each cell table, well, I can say there were 96 electricians on the Tennessee because she was electric drive. There was I think there was about 30 of them was in the propulsion gang itself.
Now, were you in the propulsion gang?
No. No, I never was.
Now, was the Tennessee one of the first electric drive ships?
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
See, we had the big five, West Virginia, California, Colorado, Maryland, and Tennessee. They were all electric drive. And I don't know if there were any electric drive ships before that or not.
What about ships like the Texas, Arizona, Oklahoma, those types?
I don't know, but I think they were reciprocating engines. I'm not too sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I think that they were reciprocating engines.
How many crew on the Tennessee? How many crew were on the Tennessee?
Peacetime crew was about 1,200, and of course wartime they almost doubled.
And what were the maneuvers you went on in those years?
Well, I went to Panama the first time, and what we call the fleet maneuvers. Every spring they had fleet maneuvers, and they did get the east. At that time we had an East Coast fleet and a West Coast fleet, and they'd converge on Panama. One of them would move in. I think the first time I was down there in spring of '29. I think the East Coast fleet moved in and took Panama. I mean, they occupied it, and then we went in and did battle with them, trying to take it away from them. And then in 1930, it was the other way around. We went in and possessed them, and they tried to take it from us.
Now, how would you play the war games?
Yeah, that's what they were. And
I mean, of course you didn't fire rounds at each
Oh,
other,
no,
but
no. Well, like I say, down below decks, and I was kind of new in the Navy at the time, and I didn't know too much about exactly what was going on. But then in 1932, I had finished my first enlistment and went out and tried civilian life for a couple of months, and it didn't work. And so I re-enlisted, and I went aboard the Detroit. It was a light cruiser, and she was built 1923 or 24, something like that. And we went to the Hawaiian Islands on our fleet maneuvers, and that was the time that the Japs found out how to take Pearl Harbor.
tell me about that.
We went out, and of course we were on the attacking force, and part of our force, probably the Lexington or Saratoga, and they got out there north of the Hawaiian Islands, and they flew the planes in and just swooped right down in across the mountains, and of course there was absolutely no radar or nothing. But they practically wiped out Pearl Harbor. And of course in 1941, 9 years later, that was the same way the Japs done it. So I guess they took their lessons from us, because the newspapers was all full of it, one thing or another. And they had some kind of a happening over in Honolulu at that time amongst the service people. So there was only one ship. I think it was the Pennsylvania. Anyway, it was the flagship of the whole fleet. But the only one that went into Pearl Harbor. We went into Lahaina Roads, and then we went over to Hilo for recreation and things like that. But there was some kind of a happening over in Honolulu itself. Some kidnapping or rape case, or I don't know what it was all about. Anyway, I was over on the dock. We was at Lahaina Roads, and I had gone over we'd rigged up some temporary lighting at the dock, because they didn't have that kind of facilities. And another electrician and I was going over, and we were taking down the lights, getting ready to leave the next. I think we left it 1 minute after midnight. We always, any place we went was always 1 minute after midnight. And while we were there, we heard on the radio there was a lady that had a little hot dog stand one day. She had a radio, and I heard about this Lindbergh kidnapping. That's when they kidnapped Lindbergh's youngster.
That was in what year?
32.
32.
May. It was in May of 1932. But I never thought too much about it, about the attack, the war maneuvers, one thing or another, until when the Japs got there. I said, okay, that's what we did in 32. It was almost the same thing. Of course, the North, now talk about Pearl Harbor. The North Pacific is one great big empty body of water. There's nothing between the Hawaiian Islands and Alaska. The Aleutian Islands stick out there. There's several thousand miles of nothing. Midway is farther on, it's north of there, but it's northwest from Honolulu. It's over farther, quite a ways farther west, 1,500 miles or something like that. So as I understand that the Japanese got underway one foggy night, and by the time they were missed by us, they were out of sight. And they had earlier sent a ship out there, and he cruised around for 3 months, right out in the middle of that North Pacific, and saw nothing, nobody. So they said, well, the shipping lanes are way north and way south. So they just went out there, and then they waited for the key word from Tojo. As I understand it, the Emperor, Hirohito, didn't even know that it was coming off. He was the Emperor of Japan, like the president, our president is. But this Tojo was, he was the, well, you might say, the Secretary of the War or something like that. In other words, he was the top of the warlords, and they were out, and so he gave the admiral that was in charge of this fleet a word of mouth key word that was right, and he said it would be right in the middle of the weather report some morning, if and when. And one morning it was, so they made the attack.
What word was it?
Something about the sun was shining brightly this morning, or some, just a little sentence like that. That was what I heard it was, or something like that. Of course, this is years later I heard this, and I don't have no idea as even as to where I got it. But this is where it was. Then the people talk about this radar and one thing and another. Radar in those days, we had a radar antenna on our big ships, and we called it a bed spring. That's what it looked like. And it was very, very, very new. And these kids that were out there, and they was playing with that radar that morning. He's out there fooling around with it.
This December 7th?
Yeah. And they spotted these planes, so they reported to their lieutenant, who was their officer in charge, and he was back someplace, so they knew where to get a hold of him. But he knew that we had 10 big B-17 bombers that had left San Diego the night before. They were on their way out there. And he knew this, and he said, well, that's probably what they picked up. Well, it might have been. And they got, those bombers got there right in the middle of the attack. All their guns and ammunition, I don't know if they even had any ammunition on them or not, but the guns themselves were encased, strapped, bolted to the floor, so they wouldn't shift. One fellow had .45 pistol on his hip, and he pulled it out and he fired at one of those Jap planes. But what can you do with a .45 pistol?
Any of those planes shot down, the B-17s?
We shot a couple of them down, but they scattered. I know one of them came in. I see. I was on a base right across from the Hickam Field, right to the mouth of the channel, and one of them started coming in there, and every machine gun at Hickam Field opened up on him. So he did a wing over and took off and went someplace.
Let me back up before we get into that. And were you on the Detroit at this time?
Oh no. I left the Detroit. I left the Detroit back. I was only on the Detroit about 8 months, something like that. And I went to China for 2 years, 2.5 years.
Oh, what'd you do in China?
I was on a 4-stack destroyer, World War I type destroyer, and we cruised up and down the coast of China, and got up to Japan for a visit one time, and made our maneuvers back and forth up there, and spent about half our time down in the Philippines. I was out there for 2.5 years, and I came back in 1935 and went to the Omaha, which is a twin sister to the Detroit. I finished out my second enlistment on her, and then when I re-enlisted, they sent me to Washington D.C. to school, and I had an automobile, so I started traveling across country. Another fellow and I, and we wrecked the car, and I wound up in the hospital for 9 months, smashed up pretty severely, and so by the time I got out of the hospital, then I was still on the schedule to go to the school. So I went on to school, and by the time I got out of school, I'd been going from the Omaha for a year and a half, so they had replaced me. As a matter of fact, they heard that I'd got killed, and so naturally they had replaced me. And then so I went to another new type ship, the Summers destroyer, and put it in commission. It was brand spanking new. This was in 37. And I finished out my enlistment on it in 1939. By that time we was back in San Diego. And I wanted to get out of the San Diego Navy, so I requested to go back aboard the Tennessee because my brother was on the Tennessee. So in fact, that's why he got on the Tennessee, because I was on there, and then I got back on it because he was on there. And this was in, I went aboard there in January 1941, or 40, yeah. And then in May in 41, well, they sent me back to the States for new construction. I was first-class petty officer and had required time to do. When they send a person to new construction or to China or places like that, where you require at that time 2 years obligated service.
And what's obligated service?
Well, I tell you enlistment's up. In other words, I had re-enlisted in December in 39, so I had 4 years from then to go on my enlistment. I enlisted for 4 years, so in May of 1941, well, I still had over 3 years to go. So they sent me back to States for new construction, and I caught a ship, put this Sincona in commission. It was a net tender, and immediately went back out to Pearl Harbor on it.
And what was the name of the ship?
Sincona.
Sincona.
Cinchona. It was a net tender. And Sincona is the tree that they get quinine from for treatment of malaria. They use the bark of the Sincona tree to get quinine. And they had a system at that time of naming ships like that. All the battleships were named after states. Cruisers were named after cities. Destroyers were named after famous Navy personnel or Secretary of the Navy and things like that, naval heroes. And then the submarines at that time still had numbers, but the small craft, oh, the seagoing tugs, they had the names of birds, and they made these net tenders. They were almost, you might say, a seagoing tug type of thing, but they had a boom built onto them out the front for handling these big concrete block anchors for torpedo nets and that sort of thing. That's what they called them, with net tenders, to handle the nets that we strung across the harbors and stuff like that. That was their main job. And but I made chief petty officer while I was waiting for it to go on commission. So as soon as we got out to Pearl Harbor, they transferred me over to the base that we came under, and that's where I was when the attack was. I was right, and this base was right at the mouth of the channel.
What were your feelings about the war in Europe?
Well, I went, while I was on the summers, in October of '38, we made a flying trip over to Portsmouth, England, and got $27 million worth of gold bullion and brought it back to the States from the bank because they figured that they might be under attack from the Germans, and war was imminent. Now, in fact, when we went over in town, they had trenches dug in the city park. The buildings were sandbagged. The major buildings, the banks, and
What year was this?
38.
38.
And we got into Portsmouth, England, the day that Chamberlain handed over Czechoslovakia to Germany, and because that was what the war was about. Then we conceded one more time. We give them one more thing. Figured, well, maybe that had shut him up. But of course, no. He had his hand out, and he was taking everything he could get. So then he immediately went to Poland. We told him no way, and so he went in and took Poland, and that was the start of World War III. But
so you were on the base at Pearl
yeah,
Harbor?
I was on the base right down at the mouth of the chest, probably a mile and a half, you might say, airline from the Pearl Harbor is there's a narrow channel that goes in through, and then the Pearl Harbor, you might call it a bay, but it's quite large. But there's just a narrow channel going in and out.
What were your duties there?
Well, I was the chief electrician mate at the base, in charge of all the electrical equipment. They were building some docks there and put up a machine shop and electric shop there to take care of facilities. We did repair work for the small craft. It was kind of I thought it was like a small craft Navy yard. That's what it amounted to. They got all of the small craft, the tugs, there were two net tenders. The Syncona was one of them. It was based there, and then the Ash was the other one. We maintained them. Of course, they had a crew on them, but anything that they needed for Navy Yard work or something like that, well, they brought it over to us. We had facilities to take care of that, and I was there. On the morning of the 7th, well, the day before, the University of Willamette from Salem, Oregon, where I had been a kid, came out to play the University of Hawaii football game. And I was over to see the game, and I saw one of the fellows there that was on the Tennessee that I knew, and he knew my brother. So I told him, I said, well, tell that brother of mine that tomorrow I'll come over and get him. I had a Cushman Motor School, and I said, we'll take that trip around the island that we've been talking about. So got my uniform laid out on my bunk, and I'm in the washroom whitening up my shoes, making them look nice. And I was in a loud kaboom, and we went out to another part of the building where a big bay window that we could see out across Pearl Harbor because it was flat land. There was some trees. We could just barely see the tops of some of the ships over there. But over behind it was a high-rise hill that had a tank farm on it, oil tanks. And somebody made the remark, well, one of them tanks must have blown up. Because just about that time, all hell broke loose. And somebody saw one of those ships with that red spot. Of course, we called it something else, but he saw that and he said, my God, the Japs are here. Sounded general alarm. So I went right back through. There was our armory was a small spot, or it was maybe 20-foot square with a railing, not like that, right into this barrack building. And my weapon was the one that had been assigned to me, was a 12-gauge shotgun with double-aught buckshot. It was right inside, and I just reached across the fence and picked it up and ran on out the back door because my job, my battle station, was the transformer station because we got our electricity from the city of Honolulu. And I was supposed to keep everybody from blowing up the transformers. I mean, that was my battle station. So I ran out there, and just as I hit the back door, I looked up, and here come a plane. He dropped his bomb in the end hangar at Hickam Field, which is just across the street. And when he could leveled off, he was practically scraping shingles off of the roof of our dining hall, which was a very low building, and he had his canopy shoved back, and his fist stuck out, and I could actually see the stitching on his glove. He had his fist stuck out, doubled up fist stuck out there, and I could see the stitching on it. So I took aim at it and pulled the trigger. He kept on going. But I never killed anything in my life with a shotgun. I never was much of a gunner. But really, that was the only shot that I fired during the whole war, because, like I say, I wasn't a gunner. I was an electrician. But they did no damage to us. But we did send some, because we had a couple of station Rikers there that was part of the base fleet, and they went up to Hickam Field and got some of the people that were injured out of that dining hall. Hickam Field was just having a breakfast, like it was Sunday morning, but and one of those big bombs lit right in the middle of that dining hall, and it killed quite a large number. And so we said we knew that they'd been hit and hit hard. So our commanding officer sent these boys up there, the drivers of these two station wagons, up to get some of the injured, bring them down, and then we made one of our barracks rooms into a emergency hospital, and took care of a bunch of them. And of course, our electricity went off. One of the Japanese bombs dropped right in the middle of a manhole up there in Hickam Field and blew the electric system apart. So our electricity went off, but we rigged up an emergency generator, and about the only thing that we used it for was to heat water for the doctor so that he could take care of these people. And a few lights on it, but it was a little bitty thing. It was about all the power it had anyway to take care of that.
What was going through your mind when you were watching the attack? What were you thinking?
I was scared. Running scared, no place to hide. And of course, later during the day, I turned in my shotgun and got a 30-06 rifle. But I never fired it, because the only thing that ever come close enough to me to see the fire, and I identified it was one of ours. But the things over in Pearl Harbor, I didn't get over there for a couple of months after. Then in June of 1942, 6 months after the attack started, then I was transferred back to the States for duty, and put a cruiser in commission to Denver, and we went out to the South Pacific. And I did the biggest part of my fighting out there. on the Denver for right at 2 years. Then in October in 44, when we got torpedoed in November of 43, came back to the States, got fixed up, and we got back out, and we went bombarded Iwo Jima on the 4th of July of 44. Cause that was just before Saipan was taken. They was using Iwo Jima as a fueling stop. They could take off from Tokyo and fly to Iwo Jima, refuel, then they'd get down to Saipan and back, refuel and go back to Tokyo. And we tried to lay waste to it. I guess we did poke it full of holes one day or another. And
let me back up again. Did you think that the people of Washington knew that Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked by the Japanese?
now then I didn't. Now I heard later that I don't know yet that they knew for sure, but I don't know why they didn't. Some of the things that I've heard, they had broken the Japanese code and this, and that, and the other thing. Of course, like I say, this is all hearsay, you might say, and it's come out even years after I retired from the service. I heard some of these things. Of course, I'm a member of 2 service organizations, and we get information that probably you don't. And we get this Pearl Harbor Survivors have a magazine, and I've read 100 articles in there by people who were there, witnesses, and this is what happened to me, that sort of thing. And every issue has got one of those stories in it. It comes out 3 or 4 times a year.
Now, during the attack, were you guarding the transformer station, you say?
Well, that was my battle station. That's what I was supposed to be
That's
doing.
where you were when...
But then when things happened and it was all a airplane attack, and there was no people coming at us, no land forces, why, naturally I went to work securing the base, getting emergency electricity to our emergency hospital and things like that, which was really a more important deal because we had no electricity. They go ahead and blow it up. We didn't need it. It was no good to us after that.
How long did the attack last?
The first attack probably lasted, not more than 30 minutes, but there were 3 attacks. A couple hours later, they come in again. And that one lasted probably 30, 40 minutes, and then the third one came in about 11 o'clock. And by that time, I guess they figured they would laid waste to everything that they wanted to lay waste to. They'd sunk nearly all of our ships, and as I understand, I heard later that we had 4 flyable airplanes on the whole
What were the
island.
people doing between the attacks? Or what did you do between the attacks?
Well, like I say, after the first attack, then I went traded that shotgun back for a rifle, and went to work fixing up this electrical system. And taking care of, like I said, we made runs up to Hickam up there where all the hurt and injured people were, and then we just kind of deployed around and just kind of keeping a watchful eye because we didn't know if and when and where they were going to be. So when the second and third attacks came in, well, we were, you might say, more or less ready for them, but I never fired a shot. There was smoke and burning buildings and burning planes and one thing and another over there at Hickam Field. It all blew right down our way. We were practically in a smoke screen because we had nothing that the Japanese wanted anyway. It was a small base that was of no importance to them. And all the shops and the dry docks outside the one that the Pennsylvania and the Castle and Downs would do 2 destroyers, they were all 3 in the same dry dock. And they they bombed Pennsylvania, and then we flooded the dry dock to put the fires out. But they didn't. Apparently, they were. We thought that they were going to move in and take it over, and then all this shop's machinery and everything was intact and in good shape, and they was going to use it. So we was ready. Some of the people even got packs and ready to pull out and head for the hills, like they did over in Guam.
So did you think that they were going to move in with land forces, the Japanese?
Well, we heard that they were.
So what did you do to prepare for it?
Personally, I didn't, because I'm a little bit physically handicapped. Was then. Like I say, that automobile accident that I'd had earlier kind of made an old man out of me in a hurry. And so if they're going to come in and attack, well, they're going to have to, I might get a gun and shoot back into them, and die there, or be captured, one or the other. But I was in no physical shape to be heading for the hills or anything like that. So I didn't.
And you just stay at the base the whole time?
Yeah. Yeah, I stayed right there at the base. It was too dangerous to try to leave, because the only way out was to pass Hickam Field, and every one of their attacks, well, there was machine gun bullets, these planes flying like flies around Hickam Field.
How far were you from Hickam Field?
Hickam Field, main runway was about 1.5 miles long, and the street run right alongside. Well, there were some shops and buildings and one thing and another, probably 50 yards from the main runway, and then we was right across that street from the far end of the Hickam Field. The main office, one thing and another, was up toward the other end of it, but there was a hangar right directly across the street from us, and it was probably 50 yards or less from our barrack buildings, where that guy come across, the one I took a shot at. He dropped the bomb in it, and when he leveled off, and when I took a shot at him, but he was. I mean, it was just across the street. It's like something out here. That hangar wasn't 50 yards from our barracks building.
So, did you ever get down to Pearl Harbor itself then, after the attack?
It was a couple of months before I ever got over there.
What did it look like at that time?
It was a mess. The Oklahoma was still over on its side, and then I got over there in June, when I got on the way back to being transferred to the States, and that was right at the time of Midway. I got over there and got to the barracks, and we were supposed to go down on the transport and leave the next day, and they held us up for 4 or 5 days because the Battle of Midway broke. And they didn't want us out there. If the Japanese would have taken Midway, then to come right on in and have anything moved toward the States, so they didn't want us to be out there and be exposed on a troop transport. So we stayed there in Fort.
What were your thoughts at that time when Midway was going on?
Well, we went out to the ammunition dump and did some repair work and one thing and another to keep ourselves busy doing something, and because they always put the trenches to work doing something. They don't just let them lay around there and be sloppy happy. But we was out there, and we knew that Midway was being attacked. Just exactly what was going on, we didn't know. And then all of a sudden they released us when we went back into the barracks, and we knew that the Battle of Midway was over, and that we had repulsed them and lost to Yorktown, and one thing and another. That's when we first started hearing the details about what had been going on for the past 4 or 5 days. And I heard at that time that Hickam Field out here, or not Hickam Field, but Tinker Field, there was I guess he was in the Army Air Force at
Yeah,
the
Clarence,
Army Air Force.
yeah, Clarence Tinker.
Yeah, Colonel Tinker, and he led his people out and found those ships and bombarded them and bombed them and radioed back. And they knew that they didn't have gas enough to get back, so they all went to the wreck, and none of them were survivors. And he was, and so they named Tinkerfield after him for that reason. But he knew they'd got to the point of no return, and they said, well, we haven't found anything yet. So they kept on flying and looking. Pretty soon they saw them and radioed back the location and went in for the attack. And while they was in the attack, well, they fell to run out of gas and had to head for the drink. Because the Japs weren't about to pick any of them up either. They were busy.
And you say that you went aboard the Denver?
Yeah.
And what were your duties on the Denver?
I was chief electrician's mate. And
And what kind of ship was the Denver?
It was a cruiser, light cruiser, 6-inch guns. And we went in commission in October in '42. And our trial runs and one thing and another, there was a brand new ship, so we had this trial runs, one thing and another, and then we went on out, and then we went on out, and right after we had left Panama, heading on out toward the South Pacific, well, they had a big battle out there, and I understand that there were 3 cruisers that were sunk in this battle. The Japanese had the upper hand. So we poured the coal to it. Well, it was oil, but it was turbine drive. And we had a destroyer running escort for us, and we practically burnt the stack off of it. And they come up alongside, and we refueled them doing 20 knots. And we weren't slowed down for another. We went out there, and then we stopped for a few hours at a little French island. They had some oil on there, so we stopped there and refueled ourselves, and probably refueled that destroyer also. And we just stayed there 3 or 4 hours to refuel, and then took right on, got out to Noumea and back up, and then see, that was in January, and then in March we made our first battle run on the Japs at Cooler Gulf, which was up from, at that time we had not yet secured Guadalcanal. I mean, we were still fighting for it, but we hadn't secured it yet.
So
And,
tell me what you did during the battle. What happened?
well, of course, I was a chief petty officer at the time, and so I got word of the battle plans. They gave all the chief petty officers an idea of what was going to be happening, and one thing and another. And Cooler Gulf was quite a narrow thing. You had to go in from the north. There was a narrow opening at the south end of it, but the ships couldn't go through.
Now, where is this Gulf?
This is down, it was east of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. And so we went in from the north end, and let me get my directions straight. Yeah, the landing field, the Japanese landing field, airfield, was on the west side of us. So we had to go in and then turn around, and we went in, of course, darkened ship. We tried to sneak in on them, and then when we turned around and started back out, then we opened fire on them. But our radar people, and by that time, well, we had pretty good radar, and they spotted a couple of things that just didn't look right, and we reported, Lieutenant the Denver, I keep saying Tennessee, but it was the Denver, spotted it, as I understand, and there were 2 little blips on their radar that wasn't supposed to be there according to the chart. And they reported to the Commodore, and he said, well, swing your guns around to the other way, because we had our guns all all trained out to port side, ready to make our firing run on the turn out. But they were still back on our starboard side. We was bringing up the rear. We were the rear ship in the column because we had the senior captain. That's where they run the Commodore, the Admiral. He was in the lead ship, and then the senior captain, he brought up the rear. So they kind of separated that way, and he could take over in case something happened to the commanding officer of the fleet. So we immediately swung our guns the other way, and and our orders were that if they moved, open fire. Well, they did move, and we did open fire. And we sunk two of them. Apparently they were destroyers, because one of them got up to 32 knots before it went under. And then when we went down and made a turn, well, they were already gone. So then we opened fire on the base on the way out, just like the rest of them had. But apparently there was a couple of destroyers, and they were waiting out there, and they were going to let us have it with torpedoes on our way out. But then we got to running what we call the slot. There's the Solomon Islands is a double row of islands, you might say, and they was using that slot, as we call the gap between them. That's where a lot of the Japanese supply ships was coming down one to another, barges with people, soldiers, and supplies, one to another, to Guadalcanal. So we'd go up. There were two forces of us, and one of them would go up one night, and then we'd go up the next night. And we did that, and finally we got on up, and we'd take island hopping. We the forces secured Guadalcanal, and we going up, and then Bougainville was the big island. It was on the far end of the Solomon Islands, and so one night we went up and swung around the far west end of it. They had a fort or fortress or something on the end of it, maybe an airfield, I don't know. But anyway, we bombarded that, and at high speed come around. That was right up shortly after midnight, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, we're back on the east end of it, and there's another airfield there, so then we bombarded it. And then we swung around to the south about the middle of the thing, and the Marines and the Army, whoever, the landing force moved in, and then we covered the landing for them. And then we patrolled back and forth for several days, 2 or 3 days, and we got word that the Japanese task force was going to come down and try to retake it. And so and I was just getting ready to go to bed that night, 11 o'clock at night, something like that, and they announced on the radio that, on the loudspeaker system, that a Japanese task force was on the way. Reports had not yet, but along about 2 o'clock in the morning, we should be close enough so that we're going to have reveille at I think it was 1 or 1:30, 1:15, something like that. They tell the Alabama. So everybody get a shower and get clean clothes, and we'll have breakfast. And by that time, according to their movement and our movement, and somebody closed the door, and that by that time we'll be ready to engage battle with them. So we did, and like I said, we had the senior captain on the Denver, and the Commodore told us to fire the opening ranging shot. They were 18 miles from us and moving in. we fired our opening ranging salvo. Now they had 2 light cruisers, 2 heavy cruisers, which 8-inch gun, and it's a peculiar thing about force, distance, weights, is one thing. The 8-inch gun of anybody's is the longest accurate gun that there is. I mean, a 10-inch won't shoot as far, or a 6-inch won't shoot as far. And that's the ultimate.
Yeah.
They had two cruisers with 8-inch, and all ours were 6-inch. But they got up 18,000 yards. Our opening ranging salvo, and we blew up one of them 8-inch cruisers. It exploded and sank right there. We went to hit in their magazine, and it was like the Arizona did. And that was supposed to have been the longest night battle in the history of the world for 4.5 hours. One side or the other was continually pumping bullets.
Now, where was this?
At Bougainville. And we sunk that one. I think we disabled another one, and they immediately opened the range. They could run fast. Our ships run about 33 knots, and theirs run 35 or 36, something like that. Anyway, they opened up. They opened up the range to something like 31 or 32,000 yards. We couldn't shoot that far. And they was firing star shells over us. Apparently they didn't have radar. It's like we did in World War I. They was firing star shells, and I happened to be up topside to see some of them. They fired star shells over us, then they could see us, and with the rangefinders, get a range on us. Because we was using radar at the time, and we see them every move and knew just exactly how far and what direction they was going. Our radar was that good.
Now, were their guns a longer range than?
Well, that 8-inch gun, that ship with those 8-inch guns, and we only had 6. But during the battle, their destroyers made a torpedo run on us, and our destroyers made a torpedo run on them. And the Foot, one of our destroyers, I don't know, he got of course they all had those, the destroyers all had those depth charges back on the stern, what we call ash cans. And they got a hit right in those depth charges from something, and it disabled them. And it smashed their rudder, it probably blew it clear off, and the propellers and the whole stern out. So they lay there dead in the water. Of course, nothing else was hurt, so they probably lost some men. But just laying there dead in the water, and everything else worked. Here come these destroyers, the Japanese destroyers coming in to make a torpedo run on us. So they swung out their torpedoes and sunk a couple of torpedoes in one of those Japanese ships, destroyers, when it was on the way in. And they went in and made their torpedo runs with, like I say, they missed all of us. Nobody got hit with one of them. And then on the way back, the Foot picked on another and got it. We got a presidential commendation out of it. This was Foot. I don't know what her number was, but I know that was part of the battle. And then that was on the 3rd of November, I think it was.
Of what year? 42?
3.
3.
Yeah. Then on the 13th of November, and I don't remember if it was a Friday or not, but it seemed like it was, that there were 4 Betty, supposed to be high-altitude bombers, flying, we could see them flying around, but they're out of range. And of course, this is the middle of the night. They up there for several hours, and they was flying, circling us, out of range, and just right about the break of daylight, here they come, all 4 of us, and they picked on us. We happened to be the lead ship at the time, and they figured that we had the commander on board. We did have the senior captain. Well, all 4 of those planes were in the water before the torpedo hit, but the last one that came in, even though he was in the water and failed to report the hit to the Japanese, the torpedo did get us. because he hit us right in the after engine room and suffered tremendous damage. But we figured that he must have been in the water because the ball never got to work, apparently. If they did, with the whole Japanese Navy or the whole Japanese Air Force would have been out there trying to put us under, because there was a seagoing tug out there. I don't know where he came from, but anyway, he took us in tow and towed us back down almost to what was the name of that? San Cristobal, I think it was. Well, it was a small island we were using for base right across from Guadalcanal, which is 500 miles away. It took us 2 days to get there at 5 knots with our side blown out. But the Japanese would have been after us if they'd have known that. You bet on that. But then we went on down to one of our bases that had a floating dry dock, and they patched up the hole in our side, and we came back to the States, and we got into Mare Island Navy at San Francisco on the 3rd of January in '44, and we stayed there for repairs until in May in '44. I went down to San Diego for post-trial runs. We had a bunch of new people aboard, one thing and another. And then we went back out, and we was in Honolulu on D-Day, and the forces went across into France. And that was in June. Then on the 4th of July was when we went up and bombarded Iwo Jima.
Tell me about that Iwo Jima.
Well, I didn't get to see much because my battle station was down below decks. Electricians didn't have any gun jobs or anything like that, but we was repair parties. And we repaired damage control, you might say. Now they've got special damage control people. And anyway, I saved for a long time the daily worksheet program for that day, because that was a happy 4th of July, and it was a big 4th of July celebration. And they blew it up kind of big on this daily program, and I kept one of these. I don't know what happened to it. My wife and I had problems, and she probably thought it wasn't anything worthwhile, so got rid of it. Whatever. I don't know what happened to it, but it was quite a thing. We bombarded that. Like I say, it was a stepping stone for the Japanese. They was coming down there and fueling, and then going down to Saipan and come back. And this was right at the time that we was fighting for Saipan. Then just in a few days after that, well, they secured Saipan, maybe due to our efforts, and then we went out and come in from the south and got into the major fleet and took Wake back. Now, Wake is farther south than Saipan. I never could figure out why they took Saipan first and then come back to get Wake, but they did. But not Wake, Guam. That's what I'm trying to say. We never did ever fight to get Wake back. They just.
What about Truck and Tarawa? What were you doing?
That's just about the time that I came back to the States, and all I know is what I heard, read about it, one thing or another. But they caught the whole Japanese fleet in there red-handed and laid waste to them. And that was I wasn't in on that at all.
Well, go ahead.
The fleet was just getting ready to move up in toward the, well, I was in on the battle of but that's it. And I know it's well known one. Anyway, that one place where they called it, that one island that had Bloody Nose Ridge, you might have heard the remark about the Japanese had these islands for ever since World War II, and they'd put gun emplacements on them one another, and the trees had grown up around all this stuff, so it was natural camouflage.
You say
Pillaloo,
yeah.
the Palau group.
They've had that since World War I, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
during the settlement, so that's how they got a lot of those South Pacific islands. Chuck was another one, and they got those over in the Micronesias. That was part of their World War I settlement, and they put gun emplacements. In fact, when Amelia Earhart, they think maybe that she was shot down by some of the people out there. They don't know for sure, but they assume that might have been possibly been what happened to her. But the Japs never would say, and they still haven't. Maybe nobody knows by now, but they didn't want anybody around them, and this Palau group was one of them. Now the ship I was on, we bombarded the island of Angar, which was part of the group, and Pilalu was another island. The group was named Palau, P-A-L-A-U, but Angar Island was a small island, and then Pilalu was the larger island. That's where they had the river. But they did have embattlements on Angar, and we bombarded that and one thing to another and made it. And the underwater demolition team went in and made sure that the beach was clear of underwater stuff, so that the Army could come in. And we had a funny thing there. The 81st Infantry came out, and they were going to make the attack on Angar. And it was their very first combat. They were all green soldiers from the States. And it was their very first action. And we'd been out there, like I say, we'd been bombarding that thing for 4 days, one day another, picking up. And they had a big old building with a big old tall smokestack on it. And we shot it to pieces. And the night before the landing, this underwater demolition team came out, and because they'd been working underwater and were pretty well waterlogged, but anyway, we gave them a hot shower and a hot meal and showed them a movie and one thing and one thing led to another. And somebody come up with the idea, so when the 81st Infantry went aground, made their landing the next morning, here was a great big 10 by 20 foot sign. To the 81st Infantry, welcome to these shores made safe for you by the U.S. Navy Underwater Demolition Team. That was the first thing I saw when they hit the beach. That was some of the funny things. Well, you heard about Kilroy. Kilroy was here when they were this one of the things like that. And then shortly after that, I came back to the station and for a change of duty. I'd been out there for almost 2 years, and so they sent me back, and I reported to the 12th Naval District, San Francisco, Port Director's office for duty, and I was there until the war was over.
What'd you do in VJ Day?
What did I do? Glory, hallelujah. We had a little wave yeoman there, and she was always down there listening to the radio, and Truman said that the war was over. We didn't know for sure that was going to be the ending of it, and then he announced that it was, and this was all about 4 o'clock in the evening, and everybody threw up their arms and cheered, and I grabbed her and planted one right full on her mouth. And she was, at this time I was chief warrant electrician, and of course I wasn't working as an electrician there. I was one of the officers at the port director's office down on Pier 40, and she was our yeoman secretary. There were 4 of us officers in this, had our desks in this one room, and then all our letter writing and things like that she took care of for us. And she and I had become quite friendly. She was a little bit unhappy. She got a little bit sad. Her mother was sick or something. She was a little bit homesick during the summer. And I said something to my wife about it. And my wife said, well, why don't we invite her over for supper some night? And I said, well, okay. So we made arrangements. She came over and had supper with us and played with our boy. He was 2, and she played with him a little bit and did a lot of good. Like I said, we got to be pretty good friends from that. And then for 4 days, they couldn't get those sailors and one thing another off of the streets. And they did $7 million worth of damage to the stores in San Francisco up and down Market Street, bashing in windows and stealing the mannequins and one thing another. And I understand that about 4 days later, they got a battalion of Marines with fixed bayonets, and they started at the Embarcadero at the foot of Market Street and marched to the lake of it, pushing those sailors off the street in front of them. They like to wreck San Francisco. They just went hog wild. But it was 4 long years of war. And
When'd you move to Oklahoma?
well, when I retired, my wife was born and raised here, and when I retired, well, she insisted that I come here to live, and I was here for a couple of years. Then we went to California. My dad was sick, and so she kind of conned me into going to California, and I quit. I was working out of Tinkerfield at the time. Had to put a good job out there, but she wanted to go to California. Well, this was family problems, and she had problems. And we practically commuted between here and California then for several years, and finally they broke up for good. And she passed away last April. Of course, we broke up and got a divorce in 1955. But by that time I was here, and I had my roots was here. I had a job here, and one thing and another, and broke into debt left to here. So I just stayed here. And by the time I got situated where I could go where I wanted to, well, I had roots enough here, so I just stayed here. Got into the scouting program. My boys were both grown by that time, and I got into Red Cross first aid work, and they had asked me to teach a first aid course to a Boy Scout troop. So one thing led to another. By the time the course was over, I was a member of the Boy Scout troop, and I've been in the scouting program ever since. That's 25 years now. 26.
Well, Mr. Slusser, I think we have a good interview.
Oh, good. You got that all down?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with it?
Thank you.